We are doing something a little different today, as you can see, aware that you didn't get your usual fill of worship. And all will become clear as we go along the journey. But if you have a Bible, Matthew 3, reading from verse 16 and then into Matthew 4. As soon as Jesus was baptized, he went up out of the water. At that moment, heaven was opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting upon him. And a voice from heaven said, "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased." Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. The tempter came to him and said, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread." Jesus answered, "It is written that man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. "If you are the Son of God," he said, "throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone." Jesus answered him, "It is also written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. "All of this I will give you," he said, "if you bow down and worship me." Jesus said to him, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Then the devil left him, and angels came and attended him. And so over the next 2 weeks, we are going to be following Jesus into the wilderness. Obviously, the wilderness throughout church history has often come, and people talk about it during Lent, the season that we find ourselves in, moving towards Easter and the promise of resurrection life. But we find ourselves with Jesus in the wilderness. Now, what is the wilderness? Well, it's translated a few different ways throughout the Bible, but it basically speaks of primarily a dry and dangerous place. It is a place that lacks resource. It's rocky and arid. Picture kind of a rocky, arid desert. In fact, the very Hebrew word midbar that they use, if you follow it through, it basically means away from something. It is defined as a place that is away from anything else. And most importantly, the thing about the wilderness, which turns up all the way through the Bible, is that the wilderness is a place that life cannot be sustained. It is a place, a geographical place that lacks the necessary resource, especially water. And in that dry, arid, rocky place, it is surrounded by hostility and wild, dangerous animals. And for that reason, the wilderness place is a place where you have to learn dependence. You actually cannot sustain yourself through your own resources and your own ability when you find yourself in the wilderness. It is a place that pushes you into fragility. It pushes you through adversity till you reach the end of yourself. And ironically, in that place, you really learn your true self. As the famous saying goes, adversity introduces a person to themselves. And so for that reason, as we come face to face with our true selves in the wilderness, it is also the primary place that God seems to use to shape character and teach dependence. And for that reason, the wilderness turns up all the way through the Bible. Almost every major character in the Bible has a wilderness experience, including, as we've just read, Jesus himself. But before we get there, and before we begin to peel away a little bit of what's happening with Jesus in the wilderness, we also go through a wilderness. Not a geographical one like the characters in the Bible, but a circumstantial wilderness. Those times where we find ourselves in life pushed to the very end of ourselves, where we find ourselves in situations where it feels like our own ability and our only ability to create resource will not sustain us in the place we find ourselves. And maybe you find yourself in a wilderness right now. Eugene Peterson, the writer of the Message version, puts the wilderness like this. There are times, no matter how thoroughly we're civilized, when we're plunged into the wilderness. Not a geographical one, but a circumstantial wilderness. Everything seems to be going along fine. We've learned the language, we've gotten a job, we've decorated the house, we've signed up for car payments, and we have accepted responsibility that define our significance. And then suddenly we're beside ourselves. We don't know what's going on within us or in another who is important to us. Feelings erupt in us that call into question what we've never questioned before. There is a radical change in our bodies, in our emotions, our thinking, or our friends, or our job. We are out of control. We are in the wilderness. Maybe you find yourself there today. Something has erupted inside of you that's making you ask questions you've never questioned before. Your emotions, your thinking, your body feels a little bit out of control from what it used to. And there's all sorts of reasons that people end up in the wilderness. Sometimes it's just the way that life comes at us, the diagnosis or the accident. Sometimes, as we're going to see, God very intentionally leads us into a place of wilderness. But then there's other times, like Hagar in the Bible, where it's someone else's actions that mean that we are forced to go into the wilderness. And you find yourself in an unfamiliar place. But I want to encourage you, if that is you this morning, there is an invitation in this story to learn how the wilderness can be both the worst, but also the very best place in our lives. Worst in that no one likes to be out of control. No one likes to find themselves at the very end of themselves, especially if someone else's actions have put them there. But also, it can be the place where you will look back and be like, it was that moment. It was something that happened in that difficult season of my life that shaped the man that God was creating me to be. In the loneliness and barrenness and adversity of the wilderness, God shows up in a way that he never had to show up before. And that changes you forever. And it's also, as we're going to see, the place that God seems to use to help teach you how to deal with the voices of the accuser, the liar, and the slanderer who bombard your heart and mind day after day. And we're going to get into all of that over the next 2 weeks. But jumping into Jesus. So this story of Jesus' life importantly turns up in 3 of the 4 Gospels. 3 of the people tasked with writing Jesus' life chose to include this story. And they place it at this important moment. Just before Jesus is about to come into his public ministry, he goes into the wilderness. And have you all wondered why and how do we have this story? From what we read, no one other than the devil was there. And yet the people who wrote the Gospels seemed to know exactly what was going on. And so at some point, Jesus came back out of the wilderness and I think sat round a fire, recounted this story to his disciples. I kind of picture it like he was like, the devil said this. And then I was like, yeah. And then he was like, and I was like, nah. But obviously Jesus decided that there was something in this story that was important for all of his disciples to know for the rest of history, because there was something hidden inside what happened here that was key for understanding him, but also understanding the journey that we all will also walk. And this moment for Jesus, this moment in the wilderness, is a crescendo moment, thousands of years in the making. And you can come to it fresh and you can read it And it's cool, like it's a good story, right? You've got Jesus and he's fighting the devil and there's clearly a goodie and a baddie and there's action and tension and drama. But if you've journeyed the thousands of years up to this point, it hits in a whole different way. Sort of picture that moment in Avengers Endgame, right? Where Captain America finds himself stood before all of Thanos' army. And he stood there, and it feels like this is Captain America against all of the powers of darkness. And then suddenly behind him, all of these portals start opening. And all of the characters from the last 21 years arrive, right? And then he sort of like twists like this. Sort of imagine this, but way more muscly. So he twists, and then he utters those words, Avengers Assemble, and it just hits differently. Now, you could watch that movie, and you could think, this is cool. Some guy holding a weird hammer, and that's great. And there's about to be a battle scene, and I get it. But if you've watched all 21 films, you realize there's way more going on behind the scenes. The same is true for this moment in Jesus. For people that have studied the biblical story, there is something happening as Jesus is led into the wilderness, and he battles these three specific temptations that hit differently if you have journeyed with him. And actually, that journey starts all the way back on the first few pages of the Bible. So God creates, we know it well, God creates in Genesis 3 a spring of water in the middle of a dry, arid, dusty place. It is a place of abundance in the middle of a wilderness. And he places his image bearers, Adam and Eve, in the middle of this abundant garden. And you all know the story. They were meant to tend and live in God's good world, but then the same slanderer, the same liar, the same deceiver comes. And he says, hold on, God's holding out on you. There's more. He actually doesn't have your best in mind. If you just do this, you will get even more than he's given you. And they don't follow God's way. They turn towards their own way and they leave the garden and they move back into the wilderness. But God sets his rescue plan in motion, and then Abraham and Sarah are called to leave the land they know, and they too journey through the wilderness, believing the promise of God that they would become the father and mother of many nations. Then we jump forward, and God meets Moses where? In the wilderness. And he speaks to him and he calls him through a burning bush. And then Moses goes and he leads the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt. And they go through a baptism in the Jordan and they end in the wilderness. There's this place, and this is what becomes really important for Jesus. There is a place between the Exodus, when they're called out of Egypt, and the promised land that they're going to. Now that journey through an actual wilderness should have taken 11 days. If you were to walk straight from the Jordan to the promised land, it's an 11-day journey. In the end, it takes them 40 years. Why so long? Well, because God is doing work in those 40 years. He's got a group of people who have known nothing but slavery. And this journey that God uses in the wilderness is to try and train them to learn how to live trusting God's provision over their lives. A group of people who have known nothing but slavery. Suddenly God is trying to train them to move away from slaves and into God's holy people without them grasping after control and trying to meet their needs in their own way. And so if you've read the story, every single day he promises to bring manna from heaven, bread that will arrive on their doorstep, enough to sustain them for the day. But he tells them, if you collect too much, if you try and meet tomorrow's need apart from God, it will rot. And you know the story. They don't do it. They don't follow his way. They try and collect too much and they grumble and they turn away. They actually ask to go back to slavery. And all of those 40 years are basically about this. It turns out it's way easier to get the Israelites out of Egypt than it is to get Egypt out of the Israelites. But it's the wilderness. In all of his wisdom, it's the wilderness that God uses. And so let's read it. It turns up in Deuteronomy 8, where God sums up that wilderness experience for them. He says, remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the wilderness these 40 years. To humble and what? To test you in order to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commands. He humbled you, causing you to hunger, and then feeding you with manna, which neither you nor your ancestors had known, to teach you that man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. Your clothes did not wear out, and your feet did not swell during these 40 years. Know then in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, so the Lord your God disciplines you. Test. And I think test for us sums up like very negative connotations. We think of sort of tests in sweaty school halls, right? But that's not what a test is about, right? That moment when I drove 38 miles an hour in my 30-mile-an-hour driving test proved that I was not ready for the road. Luckily, your pastor has never sped after he failed that driving test, right? But what tests really do is they reveal and they expose what is inside. That's what a test is really for, to reveal and to expose what is inside. I still remember the moment when I decided I was going to propose to Hannah, and I realized I needed to go and get a ring. And so I went to the local jewelry shop, and in my head I knew nothing about diamonds. And I walked in there thinking, I just want to get the biggest one I can for the little money that I have. And so I looked around, and then suddenly the jeweler's like, no. You don't understand. There's 4 C's you have to bear in mind. It's not just size, which is carat. It's also cut, clarity, and color. So a diamond is these 4 C's. Cut, how well it's been cut by the jeweler. Carat, the size. But then there's these other 2, clarity and color. Now, apparently clarity is to do with how much of the diamond is actually diamond. And color is to do if any other gases have got in there and turned the diamond away from being this brilliant white. And apparently it goes yellow. And I knew nothing about this. And so after spending many hours researching the 4 C's, I finally stumbled upon this incredibly clear, incredibly small diamond. You should have seen Hannah's face. The tears when she squinted and saw a diamond so small but so pure. It's a joke. It's a joke. There were tears of joy, I'm sure. But the cut and the carat are impressive. But it's the clarity and the color that really defines the shine. And what Deuteronomy is telling us, that this experience for the Israelites, this experience for Jesus, and this experience for each one of us, is where God seems to put the microscope on our lives to reveal the true clarity and color of the human heart. And what this story is saying is that for thousands of years, humanity did not, in fact, pass that test. They constantly turn away. The Israelites grumbled despite manna arriving on their doorstep every day. They do not trust. And what should have taken 11 days takes 40 years. And then time and time again, what the test reveals is that there is imperfections. There is yellow in the human heart. And God is committed to trying to sort that out. And then you jump forward from there. David has a wilderness experience. And then if we leapfrog over Jesus, Paul and the writer of Hebrews pick up this same story. And they actually talk about the entire Christian life as a wilderness experience. They're saying that we exist between freedom from slavery found in Jesus on the cross and the Eden of him coming one day. That we, just like the Israelites, live halfway between the two. Trying to live in the test, trying to be Eden people, even in the wilderness, before one day we get there. It's 2 weeks ago when I talked about the now and not yet. It's the same language. It's that we live between what Jesus has done, freeing us from slavery, and the promise of the abundance of Eden that will one day come when he returns. But right now we find ourselves, Paul says, in a wilderness. And that wilderness comes and it ebbs and flows in different ways. But Jesus shows us how to live in the middle of when the wilderness feels overwhelming. And so what happens? And let's just walk through it very slowly, step by step. Remember, Matthew didn't have any chapters, any verses like we do. So where we read Matthew 3 into Matthew 4, there was no Matthew 3 and 4. There was just Matthew. And so when we separate these two, the idea is that these stories go together. And so just at the very end of Matthew 3, what happens? Jesus is baptized. Notice the Israelites being baptized, walking through the Jordan. But then this voice comes from heaven, and what does it say? This is my son, in whom I am well pleased. And then it's straight after that moment, the literal next words. Then the Spirit, same God who's just said, this is my son who I love, leads him into the wilderness, this place of hardship and fragility. And he leads him, why? To be tested. Sometimes the Lord leads us into difficult situations. Why? Because your comfort seems to be less important to him than your character. And there are parts of your character that can only be shaped in the crucible of the wilderness. And so it's not that God has left you. It's actually the opposite. God is leading you into that place. And so Jesus is there for 40 days. And it says at the end of 40 days, he is hungry. The most sort of obvious verse in the Bible. After 40 days, he's hungry. So he's in a position of like weakness. He's hungry. He's desperate for food, low in energy. And then it says the devil arrives. And we have that experience, right? You never notice that sort of trials and hardship in life seems to come all together all at once. You know, trials in life are a little bit like buses. None come for a long time and then 3 all arrive at once. And it's the same thing. Why? Because there's an actual being behind the trials in your life sometimes. And he's got a lot of experience at tempting humanity. He's been doing it way back from the very beginning. And so there's these moments where you feel fragile and life just seems to pile up on you. But it says that God led him to be tested, but then the devil comes as the tester. So the devil comes as the tester. And so there's 2 things going on here. The devil is testing that you might fail, whereas God is testing to prove and produce something inside of you. 2 different beings, 2 completely different outcomes, warring over the moment that you find yourself in. And where does he go? What's the first thing? He's called, interestingly, the Satan, the tester, and the devil in this dialogue. It means the accuser and the slanderer and the tester. Accuser, remember, like these aren't names, these are titles that he has. And so what does he come? He comes and he finds Jesus in this lonely, arid, difficult, fragile, hungry place. And he says this, if you are the Son of God. Well, what did we just hear? Like 4 or 5 sentences ago. Here is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. When you find yourself in the middle of trials, God doesn't leave you unequipped. Try and think back over what has he been saying to you? What has he been teaching you? What has he been leading you in as you walk up to this place of trial that you find yourself in? Remember, God isn't there that you would fail the test. God is there to use the test to create dependence and trust and faith inside of you. And so the first tactic is he comes to him and he says, like, if you are the Son of God, and what you have to read in that is like, I mean, look at where you find yourself, Jesus. All by yourself, hungry, in the middle of a desert. And what he gets him to try and do is he gets to try and focus on the circumstance. And he says, if you really were that Son of God, if you really were the beloved one, If you really were the one that God was going to look after, you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't find yourself in this situation. You wouldn't find yourself hungry. So why don't you do something about it? Like, if you're the Son of God, why are you here? Have you ever noticed that we find the same thing too? How many times have you found yourself in a difficult situation and the lie that comes in is, if God really loved you, you definitely wouldn't be here. He loves that thought, to just repeat it and repeat it and repeat it over your life. He is great at reminding you of your lack. You shouldn't possibly be facing this. If you're the Son of God, the beloved one, you should be in abundance. You should be living in fruit. You shouldn't be hungry. And Jesus comes and he says this, but man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. And what you have to see there is the same test that the Israelites faced and failed for 40 years. On the very surface level, the question is, will God provide you what you need in this life, or do you need to go and grab it yourself? At the very heart of this question, that the accuser and the liar and the slanderer comes and he says this, what on earth do you need and how are you going to get it? Adam and Eve, same test. What on earth do you really need? Wisdom. How are you going to get it? Are you going to trust that God is going to give you everything that you need to flourish? Or do you need to go and grab that yourself? Israelites in the wilderness, do you need to grab more? Or can you learn to live different from everyone else, independence, believing that God really will provide what you need every single day? You don't need to try and live in tomorrow or next week or next month or next year, because Jesus says today has enough troubles of its own. Just live in today, believing that God will give you what you need. And so one of the reasons that we sort of decided to not do worship, first of all, this morning, we thought about doing no worship, but then we realized that people never turn up to church on time. So we need to give them a little margin. You know, that one song to arrive. I know there's queues getting the kids in. I get it. This coffee's busy. But we don't want to start with worship, because almost there's the thing about living in the wilderness is you lose all of the bells and whistles, right? All of those things that are familiar that sort of gently lead you into the presence of God. It feels like all of those things sometimes that you relied on before, they don't work in the wilderness. The wilderness is where you're pushed to the edge and it's just you and God. Will he provide for you? Can you trust him? Leaving all that other stuff in this unfamiliar land where you're not walking through the motions you've always walked through before. Will he provide what you need? But then I think it goes even deeper than that. Because Jesus doesn't say man does not need bread. Of course man, human, needs bread. He says he will not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. And so what he's saying we need food, but there's a deeper source of life that we need even more. Or to put it like this, humans, according to Jesus, to truly live, we need so much more than just the appetites and the cravings and the longings of our body. We are story-making creatures. Animals aren't story-making creatures. All an animal really needs is shelter and food. But humans are different. Humans, to really live, have deeper needs inside of them. Things like purpose and identity and significance and love. Humans, to fully flourish, need to find their sense of purpose in some bigger story than their 9-to-5 daily grind, which is why We live in an age where the removal of God, any idea of God, any grand story that humans are part of something bigger, when you take that away, it just leaves such a deep scar on the human soul, because humans need a deeper longing, way more than just our bodily appetites, way more than just food or comfort or shelter or sex or whatever that thing is. And Jesus seems to say that if you focus too much on one, you drown out the other. If you focus too much on just meeting the immediate needs of the body, it drowns out the deeper thing that you really need. And we see that in people, right? We see that in people there are times when if you just give in to the sort of base, shallow needs of the human body, you end up twisting and contorting in on yourself. But actually there is something about as you turn away from those sort of loud, immediate needs, you turn towards a deeper need of the human heart. Which is why the church during Lent for thousands of years has practiced fasting. Because it's literally putting yourself into test conditions. It's putting yourself into conditions where it says, I am going to refuse to meet the base, shallow desires of my body to push into the deeper desires of the human soul. And I'm going to not listen to this for one, because man shall not live just by this. Yes, I need this, but not just this. There is something deeper that you need, which is the voice of God spoken every day that speaks over him. You are my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased. It is that voice that comes and speaks deeper and sets your heart on fire, that speaks of purpose and love and acceptance and significance. So let me ask you right now, what shallow appetite right now is telling you that it will bring you all the life that you need? What is the thing that you turn to with the promise that it will make you flourish in this life? Because what Jesus is saying is we easily become consumed by those appetites, and we turn away from the real place that life is provided for us. And for that reason, the wilderness is the worst, but also the best place that we can find ourselves in. It is the test, and therefore it's the worst. Everyone hates being tested, but it's a test that proves and produces in you that deeper life that God longs for you to have. So maybe the band could come up. It's just coming right back to remembering, why do we even have this story? Jesus could have gone, he could have passed the test. He could have defeated the devil there in the wilderness, and we could have never known about it. But part of it is for us to understand who he is, but part of it is for us to understand who we are too. And maybe your life right now is good, amazing. Be blessed. That's all awesome. Be a joy for us all. We rejoice with those who rejoice. Enjoy the abundance of garden life in an oasis in this wilderness. But if you find yourself right now in a place of wilderness, where there are things happening around you and in you that feel unfamiliar, where it feels like you found yourself in a position where your own natural resources and your own natural ability is not going to sustain you, then maybe, just maybe, God is leading you into a wilderness experience because he has something even better for you. That this is going to be a place where you learn to live in the tender, loving care of someone who has way more resources than you yourself will ever have. Doesn't matter how rich you become, how sheltered you are, how successful you think you get to. The invitation of the wilderness is that there is someone who has promised to care for you, not always giving you what you want, but always giving you what you need. And the wilderness is the place where you learn dependence. And so I want to encourage you, if you are there in a lonely, barren and dry place, God is there with you too. And this could well be the moment that in a year or 5 years or 10 years from now, you look back and you were like, it was there that God met me. It was there when all the bells and whistles were stripped away, where I met with God and he came through as he promised that he would. And it shaped my life forever. Or maybe for you right now, you just realize that you have been living by bread alone. You've been sustaining yourself on the very basic things, whether or not that's food or shelter or human praise, or even just that endorphin hit that you get from scrolling through social media. Whatever it is. And the Lord is saying, you're drowning out the deeper voice that truly brings you life. And maybe in the heart of Lent, millions of Christians over thousands of years have chosen this period in the calendar to say that I am going to actively and intentionally quiet that voice that I might listen to the deeper, more important voice inside. And so where is it that something that was a God-given gift has grown and grown and grown inside of you, and actually you realize it's drowning out something even more important that God is calling you to? And there is, just like Jesus, an invitation to come and learn that man shall not live by bread alone, but the deeper word, the word of the Father that comes and says, you are my beloved Son, my beloved daughter, in whom I am well pleased. And we're going to get to the next two trials next week, which have got just as many layers going on. So jumping ahead, but at the very end of this story, it says that Jesus was led into the wilderness by the Spirit, but he returned in the power of the Spirit. There was something that happened in that barren, dry place that set Jesus up with the power that he needed in the Spirit for everything that he was about to do. And so in a moment, we're going to sing a song. And it's a prayer that echoes the same sentiment that Jesus is carrying in this. It's called New Wine, and it talks about the moment, using the metaphor of wine that turns up all through the Bible, of where wine gets pressed and God promises a new wine. But the words are, in the pressing and in the crushing, God is bringing something out. And so as we sing this, I'd love you to reflect on, what is the Lord saying to you? Where do you feel the wilderness experience? Where do you feel the pressing or the crushing? And instead of this just being a hard season and a difficult road and a moment to just race through and try to get to the other side, where is God using this to teach you some of the most profound lessons that a human can ever learn? And so, Lord Jesus, we thank you for your example in the wilderness. And Lord, we know how easy it is to fail that test. We know how easy it is to just be someone who grasps out of fearful, anxious toil, not trusting maybe that you turned up today, but I cannot trust that you'll turn up tomorrow or that next week or the week after. And so, Lord Jesus, as we come, as we follow you into the wilderness, we thank you for your example, for what it looks like to live in full dependence of the voice of the Lord, who speaks love and care and significance over us. And so I very specifically pray right now, Lord Jesus, for everyone who feels the loneliness and pain of a wilderness experience right now. I pray that this message, even this message, would be to them bread that would nourish their very soul as you walk with them. And we ask this all in the name of the one who passed the test, who defeated the enemy, who survived the wilderness, and who shows us how to live, King Jesus. Amen.